states to facilitate
reflected the same character. work is made possible.
Of medicine that could alleviate their suffering. It ties the hands of caregivers who know how to use it. It must be named as a harm. The cultivators and medicine makers of Northern California who built this knowledge, who developed the strains, identified the profiles, learned what worked for which patients, now largely keep that knowledge to themselves because commercial interests steal it, commodify it, and profit from it without credit or compensation. The knowledge is not being lost, it is being taken. And what is taken from those cultivators is taken from patients as well. From their access to the full expression of what the plant can offer, developed over decades of careful, compassionate work that no commercial enterprise has replicated. The policy ask is not complicated, but it requires policymakers to be honest about what is actually happening. Caregivers are filling a gap that medicine and policy have created and continue to maintain. They are doing essential work without recognition, without funding, and without the legal and regulatory support they need to do it well. In the United States, the majority of chronic patients rely on home-based care, and there's virtually no policy infrastructure supporting the people providing that care. That is not a gap at the margins. It is a failure at the center of how chronic illness is managed, replicated across healthcare systems internationally. Policy must be built on the actual reality of caregiving, its depth, its specificity, its relational nature, its dependence on knowledge that takes years to build. It must create mechanisms that fund and protect the caregiver role. It must stop suppressing the tools caregivers use. And it must ask of every provision under consideration, where is the compassion gap in this policy and who is filling it? Wade spent the last 16 years of his life answering that question in practice. With the plant, he understood more deeply than almost anyone. With patients, the system was not built to serve. With knowledge, he shared freely because he believed medicine belongs to the people who need it. Cancer cut that work short. He did not get to finish what he started. Compassion must be designed into policy, deliberately, structurally, and without apology, not as an afterthought, not as a value statement, as the foundation. And it must be compassion in action, not the acknowledgement of suffering, but the structural commitment to doing something about it. This is what Wade would say if he were standing here. It is what this moment requires. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica, and apologies to everybody for the sound delay issue. We have that fixed now. All right, next up, our next speaker will be Forrest Hurd. Forrest is a respected advocate, researcher, and founder of the Collaborators Network, a nonprofit established to provide services to catastrophically ill children and their families. And through that work has developed deep experience and practical application of cannabinoid-based therapies in children with rare diseases. He has worked closely with genetics and cultivation practices that led to the development and preservation of important CBD-rich varieties such as Harlequin. Forrest will help provide the technical application perspective behind why these plants were developed and how they became so important for patients seeking cannabinoid-based therapies. Please welcome Forrest Hurd.
Thank you. All right, through there well enough. Thank you, everybody. I want to say thanks for bearing with some of the technical difficulties that we're dealing with that here. I'm improvising myself, so if you see me holding a couple devices, that is why. But it looks like we got most of the big ones worked out. And again, thank you for everybody for your assistance on that. I want to start by first thanking the Veterans Action Council for inviting me here today to speak about this and represent patients and give a firsthand account of patients and their interactions with cannabinoid medicine. As mentioned, I primarily work with children, and that will be the focus today. After spending a few days here at the C&D and speaking to member state officials and advocacy groups, I've kind of come to realize that the progress cannabis medicine has made in the last decade has been excellent. But at the same time, there's a lot of people that are being introduced to these concepts for the first time. People who have influence in policy and influence in laws, being introduced to subjects and influences from people with different motivations as far as cannabis and cannabis medicine. And, as a patient advocate, I hope to give some direct context for not only the importance of CBD-rich cannabis medicine, but also why the need for flexibility within the system is critical. As a parent advocate, for years, I've seen children's safety repeatedly used as a weapon against policies that would allow research and access for patients in need. A key factor that is always missed in these arguments is that children exist on both sides of the cannabis health and safety issue. Yet without fail, most policy is shaped without the nuance and care this reality deserves. Children that rely on cannabis medicine often face conditions so severe that without access, many of them would not make it to adulthood. I don't think enough people, even within the advocacy committee, stop and ask themselves why they don't see large adult communities of rare epilepsy patients advocating in the hallways at events like this, when we see other groups collect themselves and come and advocate for their health and safety. The reason is as simple as it is tragic. For many of these children, the conditions they suffer from are so severe that they simply do not make it to adulthood. They are a silent patient group, unable to advocate for themselves, yet pay the harshest consequences for the decisions that we make. Before I begin, I want to warn you that some of the images in this presentation might be difficult to look at. There will be videos of seizures. And if that's something you don't feel comfortable watching, please do what is best for you. But I do encourage everyone to bear witness to these children, even if it is uncomfortable. I feel very strongly that if one is going to legislate, advise on policy, or advocate for change, it is critical that there be no doubt about the level of suffering we cause when overly restrictive policies are put in place. In other words, if as a lawmaker, one is going to support laws that prevent access and prevent treatment, they should not be spared from having to see the results those policies put in place. We all need to see it. We need to own it. We need to feel it. It is important to point out to our representatives that we are at the very foundation of our advocacy, brought here not by cannabis. Not a cannabis user in any way, and brought here by witnessing or personally experiencing immeasurable suffering. And it was to my surprise, as much as others, that relief from that suffering was found in this plant. So bear with me as we share and set up this presentation. Because of that, and because of what we experienced here, I'm going to be sharing my personal experience, something I haven't done in quite some time. So we will start with that into, let's see, place my 23rd. First, okay, we will start with that into the work that we did with patients across the board. Excuse me. Share optimize. I can see you do it that way. These were some of those difficulties I was talking about. Okay, excellent. So I am not just a advocate for other kids. My journey brought me here with my own journey with my own son, and that's where I would like to start today as an introduction to getting to see some of the patients that rely on these medicines. So my son name is Silas. He was born with no signs of any health defects, no genetic markers, no conditions. He hit all his developmental birthmarks. And I point this out because it is a misconception that a lot of these kids with these diseases are born with genetic things that are present day one. He hit all his marks until about the age of 4 and then started to develop issues. So other than the joy of having a captive audience, look at pictures of your kids, which I know we all enjoy, the purpose of this is to really demonstrate this young man and how he grew up and hit developmental benchmarks, spoke, communicated, did all the things that you look for as parents to do as you hope for your children to develop in a healthy manner. At about 4.5, this picture on the left was taken about a week before his first seizure. Silas started having seizures. They were hard to recognize at first because a lot of people think of grand mals as seizures. Silas started having complex partial seizures at first, and then atonic and absence, and eventually grand mals. And eventually he had several, up to 10 different kinds of seizures at his peak. Within 6 months of his first seizure, he was having several seizures a week. And within a year, he was having several seizures a day. That trajectory went pretty rapidly once he got sick.
And again, I show this early trajectory for lawmakers to recognize that nobody knows when they're going to be a patient. You cannot look at a child and say, well, mine doesn't need that. From one day you could, and in our experience, the next day, or for one day you could not, and the next day you may need those medications. So we advocate for the parents and children who do not know they need it yet, even when they advocate against what we're trying to set up for our communities. Within a year, or 2 years, excuse me, he was having up to 200 clusters of seizures. So what that means is they would start with atonic seizures, they would move into complex partial, and then they would go into severe grand mals that required heavy benzodiazepine medications to intervene. I want to talk specifically about side effects. A lot of times you will hear the side effects of CBD used as an argument against the medication. They list drowsiness, diarrhea, liver issues, fatigue, irritability, poor sleep. I think that's an intellectually dishonest argument when you compare it to the medications and the options that these children have available today. This is my son on a medication called Depakote, or I think the official name is, what's it called? Valtor?
Velcro.
Valpro, thank you. Again, my notes aren't where they're supposed to be here with me. But where we got it, it was Depakote, right? And this is a condition that also has all the side effects that CBD lists, to much more of an extreme, including requiring the check of the liver function before you take it and on a ongoing basis as you take this medication. Besides those ongoing severe side effects, I think the physical toll that it takes on the body is relatively clear. And these photos, to me, really demonstrate as parents why some people might not understand when we scoff when the word side effects are used as a reason to limit access to certain medications. The side effects in these rare conditions that are being taken are extreme already. Opioids, benzodiazepines, heavy seizure medications with severe liver and kidney damage potential. By December of 2014, Silas was having over 2,500 seizures a month. He was diagnosed with a condition called Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. We had exhausted every medical medication that they had, and they were rapidly increasing. We were essentially told that he would not live to see 10 years old. So from his first seizure at 4.5 to telling to prepare for his death this was about, he was 7 when we were told this, and they said at this rate he would likely not see 10 years old, and we were sent home to essentially watch a child slowly seize to death. That is something that is hard to take in from just the sentence.
I do have some video we're going to see later so we can experience what that feels like as a parent. So this was before CBD was in gas stations, which any parent or advocate with any sense will side with anyone arguing against and sharing the risk of these things. This was before it was a buzzword that was being sold as a miracle drug, which it is not. This was before CBD was pumped into all sorts of things, which can cause harm, if not clean, if parents with people with rare disease mistake it for medicine. This is why regulation is important, but at the time there was nothing. Epidiolex wasn't even thought of at this time before, our kids paved the way in clinical trials for that to be approved. But there were parent groups that went on to be sponsored in the CNN documentaries. We were working behind the scenes trying to save our kids, and that success is what has led to this being universally accepted as a medicine, where even the most staunch proponents of cannabis can't deny any longer that it is a life-saving medicine. Well, that happened from anecdotal parent reporting of success. And I want you to keep that in mind as I correct some of the record on what CBD does and does not do and how it is successful, even though proponents will say, well, there's no studies of that yet. Well, there were no studies of any of this until they got the data from us that this was working. And just because the studies haven't been done in other aspects of it, we do know better on what does and does not work for these kids. Unfortunately, this is one of those misconceptions. Isolate CBD had no effect on my son's seizures. As a matter of fact, isolated CBD doesn't affect a lot of kids with rare epilepsy seizures. It does have a percentage of impact, and you'll see those in the Epidiolex studies. But compared to other types of medicines in conjunction with other compounds, the effect is minimal. For some kids, it could be a 10% reduction. For some very few kids, you'll hear that miracle benefit, but for the most, it is not a very effective medicine as compared to other preparations. It is much safer than any other seizure medicine. But the misconception I want to really clear up here is that having access to CBD isolate does not mean a child has access to a medicine that's beneficial to them. And the more isolated it is, the less its efficacy tends to be. Because my son didn't respond to it, I almost gave up. This is the thing that happens to a lot of parents. They hear cannabis is a miracle. They try some sort of CBD. They probably don't know what effective dosing is or what therapeutic dosing is. If they're lucky, they're getting it from their doctor, doing something like Epidiolex, and they are going to get clinical dosing help at that point. But for a lot of kids, it doesn't work. And they write off cannabis therapies because they've heard that if CBD is for kids and CBD did not work for my kids, then I must not have a solution. That is not the case. Unfortunately, not many parents know that. There are a lot of different options that we will get into, but where I want to start here is I also didn't know that. And in speaking to some folks from the Americans for Safe Access and other organizations, the concept as a young parent was brought to me that there's just been this observation that some people tend to respond differently to one plant than they do another, despite the same CBD and THC profiles. So it just gave this glimmer of hope for a parent who was already out of options as to what there still might be something out there that might work for us. So what I did is I started partnering with other collectives and just getting my hands on anything I could because I'd already used every medication possible from the top doctors in the country. We've tried CBD, which was, back then a very scary thing to do. Very little was known about it. It didn't have an impact. And we started trying other cannabinoids. Now, when that happened, we eventually found a plant that he responded to out of nowhere. And this, I'm really condensing this, but this was over about 6 months. We had pretty much lost hope, but I was like, fine, if we got another one, let's try it. And when we tried this extract, it was from a plant called medicinal haze, his seizure stopped. We saw kind of that miracle thing. He had not had a seizure for years. And for the first time, he had no seizures the next day. I was like, well, that's weird. Maybe it's a coincidence. And then it went the next day. And then it went the next day. And then it went 4 months, the entire time we had that one bottle. But because we weren't set up and prepared for this, they were just trying different things at random. That's all we had. We had that one bottle. And that was it. But in that 4 months, I want to show the reverse of that because the doctors started to wean him off his Depakote because he wasn't having any seizures. They started to lower the dose, not completely take him off it. But in that same time, we saw it completely reverse as far as his health and facial features. Swelling went down. We were using much less benzodiazepines, and we just saw health. We saw cognition come back. His ability to speak had returned somewhat. He was a kid who was laughing and playing again. And this is where someone goes from not sure about cannabis therapies to a staunch advocate, as I think any parent would in these situations. Any parent seeing that sort of transformation and benefit would say, hey, there's something here. I know the research isn't in yet, but there is something here that we need to look at. There's a possible savior for my son here. And then, long story short, again, we started working with those strains to get them. We started growing that cultivar specifically for my son. And at one point, our county that we lived in started with a measure called Measure W that was an outdoor cultivation ban. And in pressuring our communities and putting policy in place that restricted cannabis growth with no consideration for there being cannabis being grown that wasn't for recreational use, they started doing
blind raids across the county, and they raided the garden that an organic farmer was growing my son's medicine in. And we lost a whole year's worth of medicine and completely ran out. That is when I became an advocate. That is when I learned that the moral and ethical ground that a lot of these people stand on is not as solid as they think when we fail to care for the most vulnerable and sick in our communities. And I didn't hear it being articulated as dire as I felt that it was. And at that time, I started producing media material. I started going on the news, and I started putting my experience into the face of those people who did not give it the weight of seriousness that I saw having to go home to it every night. It's real easy to nod and hear, yeah, I've heard kids have seizures. Easy to. Different to go home to it every night and experience it. So with that, I would like to play a few minutes of one of those videos that I made, and I'm going to end it with a quote from our sheriff in our county. And I want to see if it sounds familiar to some of the things we're still dealing with almost a decade later. We do not have sound, though.
Oh, no. Sure.
Breaking the law should fall on the back. I don't feel that the biggest cost of those people breaking the law should fall on the backs of innocent children.
Nevada County authorities are cracking down on outdoor marijuana growers with a new ordinance. But one father is speaking out. He says the crackdown is jeopardizing his sons and other children's lives. CBS 13's Kelly Ryan is getting answers on the fight for Silas.
No, I'm the goofy goober, yeah. You're the goofy goober, yeah. Goofy, 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 goober. Okay.
What's my name? Okay, sit, honey. Come on, son. No. Okay, get down. Honey, breathe. Oh, thank you.
Holding on to what you fear, you cannot be free. Sitting in the grass till dawn,
7,
while the house is
9, 10, ready, back, here we go.
holding tight to what you know. You cannot be swayed. The gift that comes to change the roads. You feel that you're safe. Feel you're safe. We do not fear what you run from. We do not fear what you want from.
I have this mixed feeling, and I don't know what his motives really are. If he's being put out there as the front person to try to help the industry expand what they're doing is one aspect. But if he's doing it because he cares about his son, my heart goes out to him. I guess if I were in his position, I'd probably want to do the same thing. I want to protect my child. I want to do what's best for my child. But there's a bigger picture here, and we talked about it with the board. You can't make exceptions, because where do you draw the line?
Thank you, and thank you for sharing that with me. Here's we can get it. It's hard for me to share that. I actually haven't watched that in a very long time. It's hard to watch as a parent, and the PTSD that comes along with that. But it's not meant to just be, oh, let's pull on heartstrings. It really isn't. It is meant to have a visual reference for what it means when parents say they're experiencing watching their kids seized to death. This was many of our days sitting on a couch with our other options. So if we're going to restrict access, what are the options we're going to approve? And I want lawmakers and policymakers to understand this is what we are going to approve. Pumping Ativan into their mouth to stop seizures, or Diastat rectally daily until they die. That's not an exaggeration. It is an extremely common occurrence. And that is the sort of perspective that I hope to give in these videos, more than just manipulation of emotion. It is emotional, but I really want to make sure that's understood. It's not our purpose to manipulate through hard videos. It's meant to give an understanding of the alternative when we have over-restrictive policies. So with that option, I started working with my local community to try to find a solution. I had already known that there is an answer out there, but we didn't have the science and the research yet to really understand why. But I do know that certain compounds affected the seizures and others didn't. And that is where I met Wade Laughter, the VAC member that is also being honored here today, and how our stories intertwine is a man who had a heart and an understanding of genetics, and a father who wasn't going to take no for an answer from doctors and lawmakers who were told me, I just can't handle this on my own because it's not safe. There's no way I could possibly manage to make a safe medicine on my own, because we're the only ones who could do it for our community. Unfortunately, kids like my son didn't have the time to wait for that. This video was 10 years ago, and we're still hearing the same arguments today. If I had listened to those options and those people tell me they're the only ones who can manage it for us, he would be dead. So I introduced Silas to Wade. We started talking about what cultivars we could get our hands on. We started talking about Wade started teaching me about soil and health and how to grow organically and cleanly, because cannabis is a bioaccumulator. Yes, we all know that. And yes, we do take that into account when we make these kids medicines. And we started from the soil up to start to build small gardens at first with plant diversity, and started to isolate plants with different cannabinoid profiles that they were expressing, different dominant terpene profiles, different cannabinoid profiles. This was, at this point, people understood CBD and THC, but we were already experimenting with acidic compounds, V varieties of CBD and CBG and everything else. We were just trying to get every way this plant could express itself. We wanted to have it expressed. And Wade started teaching me how to get these plants to meet their fullest potential in a way that I could meet my dream. And my dream was I wanted a lab-tested, clean medicine cabinet of cannabinoid profiles, because we didn't know what was doing what. But what I did know is it was safer than anything else I'd given my son. And if we had the separate cannabinoid profiles, we could then titrate up systematically and methodically with the help of doctors and scientists and start to observe and document what works and what didn't. And I had the idea, if we could build customized medications, we might be able to see what works for certain kids. Because the one thing I recognize at this point, after meeting quite a bit of other families with rare epilepsy trying cannabis, the one thing we've noticed right away is none of our kids needed the same thing. None of them. They all needed something a little bit different. Whether some of them had different conditions, from Dravet syndrome, Deuce syndrome, Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, undiagnosed intractable epilepsy. The mechanisms that were causing them were somewhat different, and what they needed was different. Again, this is to solidify the point that any time you hear that CBD isolated alone is what children need, so we've got that covered, it is a drastic oversimplification and just not true. As we produce these medications, I started partnering with labs. Yes, all lab tested. Long before anyone asked for it, we were testing for molds and heavy metals and pesticides and all those things, along with terpene profiles and cannabinoid profiles. These were our friends at Sequoia Labs. They gave us free, unlimited testing. This is what a community can do if they're not restricted out of hope. Free, unlimited lab testing, and we did. And we built one of the greatest profiles and collections from top-of-the-line extractors, free lab tests, and organic farmers of a cannabinoid medicine cabinet that we've seen in a long time. And that group is what became the Calandrius Network, a network of people who are just determined to put together an option for families in need when there are no others, through the science that we knew and safe, ethical approaches for kids. And it scaled. We scaled to bigger and bigger farms, and we started to just build those collections. And when that happened, we started to see success. This is a very condensed version for time, but eventually in these experiments, I took notes and notes and notes, observed where we saw decreases and increases in seizure activity. And after a very long time, we were able to customize a blend for my son that stopped his seizures completely. In the last 5 years, he has had 2 seizures total. And we'll talk a little bit more at the end. But as that success happened, of course, all our friends in the community started asking, and we started not saying, here's what your child needs. Here's what a child with epilepsy needs. We started saying, we don't know what they need. And anyone telling you they know what they need is trying to sell you a product. And I mean that for pharmaceutical companies or for the guy at the street at your dispensary. If they are definite about what they tell you they need when it comes to these sort of conditions, they want to sell you something. Let me tell you from experience that I've worked with thousands of kids at this point. I don't know what we need, but I do know that we can have a methodological approach to determining what you need, and you can do that safely. So that's what we did. We taught parents how to take notes. We talked to scientists and got feedback from Dr. Russo and others who were on the cutting edge of that to make sure that we were understanding science correctly, because I'm not a scientist. I'm not going to explain the endocannabinoid system to you, even though I probably know it better than most. But we brought professionals in to guide us with that. And then my brother and I, Wade and others, we hit the road. We tried to get support. We got support from other industries. We went in education. And a lot of times, sounded like I was on the other side of the argument to protect the kids, because there was a big wave of selling miracle cures with CBD that hit, that I knew were potentially harming kids. And we worked with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of families, and we developed a system that worked, and not one of those kids required the same medication. And then I started getting calls from other families. And this is where I really expanded what intractable or catastrophically ill meant. And this is where I started getting calls from families who heard what we were doing for kids with seizures and wanted to see if they could help our kids with never-ending inflammation. And that is where I first met Charlie. And if you have Netflix, there's a documentary that just came out called A Matter of Time, where Eddie Vedder is doing a fundraiser for kids with epidermolysis bullosa. And my friend Charlie is in that video. He worked with Eddie Vedder and others for a long time. And unfortunately, he passed away recently. But for years, we worked together. And again, just like my son's seizures and Charlie's epidermolysis bullosa, cannabis is not a cure. We're talking about mitigating suffering. And I got asked by the parents of these kids with epidermolysis bullosa, we need something to break down inflammation to manage pain. Do you think there's something here that could help? And long story, this is too long of a story for this, but it wasn't taken up lightly. We talked about doctors, about risk of infection and so on. We were careful in what we did. But again, we talked about the risk versus the reward. And when you're dealing with kids who have no other option and their life is short anyway without treatment, then you take risks. And that family wanted to take risks to end Charlie's suffering. And we started working with creams and topicals that were known to do some benefit, and cannabinoids' impact on inflammation was well documented at that point. So we said, let's give it a shot. And with Charlie, we started working together at the DRCNet to just develop these creams. And Charlie was brave enough to help us work it out together, because they did not do a lot at first. And over the course of a year, we started developing a cream that, once we solved the transdermal issue of absorption into the skin, I started getting texts back one day from Charlie's mother of showing us putting it on his neck. She said at first the only benefit was he actually got some benefit, probably from the THC components in it, where she said it looked like he relaxed for the first time in his life. But we were aiming for inflammation care. And she started sending me these pictures where we had made some tweaks. We had added some ingredients that we hadn't used prior after getting clearance that it was likely safe. And we started seeing what we were looking for, which was rapid. This was about 5 days different. She sent me this one before the cream, but it had to be bandaged closed before. And we just started seeing healthier looking skin heal. This was Charlie's knee that had been open like this for 6 months. And on that same cream, within a week later, we saw it shrink, and we saw the level of the open wounds start to close. So I got excited, and we continued to work. And then other families started reaching out to us, and we worked with hundreds and hundreds of families with epidermolysis bullosa. For those who don't know, this is a skin condition. It's genetic, where if you touch the skin, it blisters. So they live like perpetual burn victims. There is no cure at this point. We're fighting for a cure. The cure will not be cannabis. Cannabis is the quality of life. But in reality, most of these kids end up, or a lot of them, excuse me, I don't like to overgeneralize, but infection is a big problem, as you can imagine, right? And in a healthier skin set, infection is less likely, and we see just healthier children overall. And all of these kids are kids I worked with. These are not pictures that went anywhere. This is sent to me directly. I didn't pull these off the website. I know each one of these children's names. And we started getting references. We started getting references for these, the success that we were seeing. And because of that, we continued to work with EB Kids while the Collagious Network was in operations. I show this to you again, not for shock value, but to show what can happen safely, effectively, with community action when there's flexibility in the policies that we put in place. The people who need it, they will work with it. We developed this cream over the course of 2 years. We helped hundreds of kids. We ended up calling it Charlie's Cream. Again, this was never sold. This wasn't a business. Not a single dime was ever asked. I paid for most of this out of my own pocket. We did fundraising, and we moved on. So, in conclusion, I I would like people to consider these things when they decide to advocate and make policy. Proposed CBD scheduling and control measures, especially those presented as protection for public health and safety, must account for all affected communities, particularly the patients who will suffer the greatest harm from overly restrictive policies. CBD isolate alone is not sufficient for many of the most serious conditions. Overly restrictive limits on THC, minor cannabinoids, and terpenoids can strip away therapeutic value and leave the most medically vulnerable patients without meaningful treatment options. That is a fact. When you hear the studies haven't been done yet, just know they will be eventually, but we've lived it. Just as we lived with CBD stop seizures, and that is now also a fact that is proven. Member states should preserve medically necessary flexibility and composition so that access frameworks reflect clinical reality and not stigma. And with that, I want to thank you all for having me here today. Here's Silas today at 19 years old, graduated high school, 2 seasons in the last 5 years, thanks to the ability for us to treat our kids. I hope you allow that in your member states as well. Thank you.
Forrest, thank you for that most powerful testimony. There's nothing like being thrust into the limelight of activism just to help your beautiful, now healthy son. So thank you very much for that. All right, we'd like to shift the focus from the lived experiences we've just heard to the international policy framework that is increasingly shaping access to cannabinoid medicines worldwide. This is a potential game changer, and to help us understand that perspective, we're honored to welcome Pavel Pakta from the Czech Republic. Dr. Pakta is one of the most experienced experts in international drug regulations with decades of work inside the United Nations system. He served the International Narcotics Control Board from 22 to 25 and previously held senior leadership roles, including acting secretary and deputy secretary. He also served as director for international regulatory affairs in the International Cannabis and Cannabinoids Institute, and he has participated extensively in meetings of the Commission on Narcotic Drugs, ECOSOC, UN General Assembly, and the World Health Assembly. Dr. Pakta will help us understand how evolving interpretations of international conventions are shaping the future of CBD access globally, and why the teleological review was necessary. Please join me in welcoming Pavel Pakta. Distinguished colleagues, Dr. Pakta, you've recently taken to social media to voice your opinion on CBD. On those posts caught our eye, which is why we invited you here today. Governments are currently establishing or updating regulatory frameworks for hemp and cannabis with low THC content. In doing so, it is important to take note of a recent classifications by the International Narcotics Control Board regarding both the control status of cannabidiol, CBD, and the interpretation of the industrial cultivation under the single convention on narcotic drugs. Until recently, the board endorsed the position that all CBD obtained from cannabis by extraction should be controlled as a narcotic drug under the 1961 convention, even if it contained only trace amounts of THC. This view is based on the literal interpretation of the treaty's provisions. Cannabis extracts are listed as Schedule 1. CBD is obtained by extraction, therefore CBD would be considered an extract and thus subject to control. However, this interpretation was increasingly questioned as it did not fully reflect one of the fundamental objectives of the 61 Convention, namely that substances subject to international control are psychoactive substances, liable to abuse, and capable of producing dependence. A strictly literal interpretation risked extending control beyond the treaty's underlying purpose. Since 2023, the board's position has evolved. It now follows a teleological interpretation grounded in the object and purpose of the convention. Under this approach, purified CBD obtained from cannabis extract does not have to be controlled as a narcotic drug, provided it does not contain controlled levels of THC. This understanding is reflected in an official INCB documentation, including Form B, which references substances not covered by the 61 Convention that may be manufactured from cannabis, such as CBD, CBD isolate, CBDV, CBN, and other cannabinoids not under international control.
It should be noted, however, that the 61 convention does not establish a specific THC percentage below which product ceases to be considered a cannabis extract and instead becomes a substance not under control. Governments therefore retain the responsibility to determine such thresholds in good faith, ensuring that regulatory frameworks prevent abuse while remaining consistently with treaty obligations. Further, in 2024, the board reconsidered its interpretation of Article 28, Paragraph 2 of the 61 Convention on the International Cultivation and Industrial Cultivation. That provision states that the convention shall not apply to the cultivation of cannabis plants exclusively for industrial purposes, described in the text as fiber and seed. Previously, the board interpreted this classification as exclusive. However, upon reconsideration, the current opinion is that the fiber and seed should be understood as illustrative examples rather than an exhaustive list. Accordingly, the cultivation of hemp cannabis with low THC content for the extraction of cannabinoids not under international control, such as CBD, may be now regarded as industrial cultivation within the meaning of Article 26.2. At this time, governments must ensure that cannabinoids under control of the Convention on Psychotropic Substances, particularly THC, including THC obtained as a byproduct of extraction, are controlled in accordance with the requirements of that convention. These classifications provide important legal certainty for governments developing hemp and CBD regulatory framework. They demonstrate that treaty interpretation must remain consistent with the object and purpose of the conventions, protecting public health while permitting legitimate industrial, medical, and scientific uses. Dr. Pakta, please help us understand the thinking behind these new INCB treaty interpretations and what they all mean.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me here. It's a great honor for me. And in fact, I must say, I have been also very much impressed by the statements of the speakers before me. Thank you for the invitation. Mr. Chair, you have just said everything. I think I should close my presentation at this point. But I would like also to refer a bit to what one of the predecessors before me said, this feeling how the international framework has been changing, how all the framework of these discussions in the Commission and in other international meetings redirects the international drug control towards health and towards human rights. If you read, for example, I'm not anymore a member of the board, but if I read the last report of the board just published 2 weeks ago, I was impressed by the very strong references to human rights. All the provisions of the international drug control treaties should be implemented, but in line with the requirements of human rights. So I think, yes, there has been a change in this international environment. There has been a change in this direction, as I've just indicated. But of course, the final responsibility for the implementation of the treaties is with the national governments. And I understand in your country, there is a federal level and there is a state level, and that all these levels play an important role. And of course, it should be understood that the international controls, please, should not be considered as an obstacle for some kind of national controls. There is a lot of flexibility. Everybody in international bodies is, repeating the fact that the treaties are flexible and that you have a lot of discretion at the national level to implement. So we have seen this change with respect to the CBD, but of course WHO acknowledged CBD is not to be controlled as a narcotic drug. Then there was some discussion if CBD is obtained from cannabis, whether it should be controlled as a cannabis extract. As you have seen, even INCB concluded in 2023, no, even, of course, also CBD extracted is not to be considered a narcotic drug. The only cannabinoids which are under international control are THC, and HHC was put under international control last year under the 1971 Convention. So this environment has been changing. However, we have heard many times in this presentation of this what your chair has just said about isolate, THC isolate. But in this presentation, we have also said about the importance to have some THC in this presentation, THC in it. So please, the conventions, of course, allow the use of cannabis containing THC for medical purposes. This is allowed by the conventions. It was very much emphasized in the year 2020 when this commission deleted cannabis from the so-called Schedule 4 of the 1961 convention. That was a schedule of some kind of suspicious and dangerous substances. The government should be careful with respect to them. Cannabis has been there, for example, with heroin for very, very long time. In 2020, on the recommendation of WHO, this commission deleted cannabis from that schedule. So cannabis, yes, cannabis is containing THC, is a controlled substance under international treaties, but it should be available for medical purposes. In fact, it is an obligation of parties to the treaties to control these substances and by the same time to make them available for medical purposes. Implementation at national, federal, and state level. So I will not speak long because the facts have been stated. But when I was listening to this, so please also THC, also cannabis containing THC or CBD with some THC, that should be available. This should be made regulations in such a way that this is made available to the patients. And when I was in the board, there was a discussion about the home cultivation. And some people were, this is a problematic issue. This can be easily misused. The quality is not like if you would get it from a medical practitioner and so on. But the final conclusion of the board, and it was also communicated to governments, that also home cultivation of cannabis is in line with, if it's for medical purposes, is in line with the requirements of the treaties. I didn't mention it in any publication, but I didn't consider it so topical. Now I see it may be very, very important, to emphasize that this body also acknowledged that it is not ideal, that of course, if the doctors would deliver it to it and you could use it, would be better. But if necessary, this also should be considered as a cultivation for medical purposes, and that should not be prevented. So the governments should consider this, and this should be considered also as a legal activity, as for medical purposes. So the world has been changing towards the needs of the patients, and please do not consider this international framework now to be a big objection for the implementation at the national level. And this really depends very much on your national regulators, how these substances will get accessible to your patients. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Pakta. Thank you, Dr. Pakta. Okay, so we're going to bring it back to our friend Wade. I would like to introduce one of our members. His name is Nate Landau on the end here. Nate is a cultivator and educator known for his work with living soil systems. This regenerative cultivation approach focuses on building healthy soil biology to produce cannabis plants with greater expression of cannabinoids and terpenes. His work reflects a broader movement in cannabis cultivation that prioritizes ecological stewardship, sustainability, and plant health. Nate also worked closely alongside Wade and was part of the community of cultivators committed to improving cannabis for patients throughout careful breeding, observation, and respect for the plant. His perspective helps connect the technical craft of cultivation with the patient-centered ethos that guided much of his early work around THC-rich cannabis varieties. Please join us in welcoming VAC Council Member Nate Landau.
So, and speak very briefly. We up here fortunately got the pleasure and honor to know Wade, and most of you haven't. So I just want to try to paint a quick picture of who he was. The whole idea of the side event was born when we found out the sad news that he passed away, and we were all lost their words. Like, how can we commemorate him? And then I believe it was Michael Krawitz said, let's do a side event in the UN. And just like that, that's why we're called the Veterans Action Council. One thing led to another, and it led to this amazing panel. I had a very unique relationship with Wade. I unfortunately only met him in person once, but I spent over 1,500 hours with him on Zoom calls because we are policy nerds and we spend many hours on Zoom calls. And Wade was a person where I would have the worst day, and then I would get on the Zoom call, and his little window would pop up, and just seeing his smile on his face, boom, changed my mood right away. He always never had any bad word to say about anybody. When obviously he's very knowledgeable, and when he would need to correct you, he would do it in such a constructive criticism that you had no other way but to implement it. It was amazing. This is a story that sums up. This is my last phone call I ever had with him. I was in a bureaucratic war with the city of San Francisco. They were trying to shut down a facility, and he heard I was going through a rough time. The time I didn't know that to actually die and didn't have many breaths to spare. He was on oxygen. He called me up and asked me how he was doing. I was trying to push the conversation, asking how he was doing or his medical condition, and he would allow me, and he cheered me up for 40 minutes. And only after we were finished, we were near the end of the call, I heard him breathing really heavily. I'm like, why are you breathing heavily? He's like, oh, I can't breathe on my own anymore. I'm breathing oxygen. I said, wait, why would you do it? You need every breath you take. He's like, I want to help the world with every last breath I have. Well, Michael, we didn't have time to talk about it, but I did promise him at the end of the call that I will name Spain after him, because I want to make sure his name continues to live on, because he was such an amazing person, and he had such a large impact in my life. Thank you for being his partner for so long.
All right. As we close this side event, I want to thank our speakers and the sponsors of this event, the Veterans Action Council, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, with support of the DRCNet Foundation. Of course, the European Coalition for Just and Effective Drug Policies, ENCOD, Fields of Green for All, and Law Enforcement Action Partnership, and the Veterans for Medical Cannabis Access. And of course, all of you for being here today in person and those who are joining us online. You and the world are now aware that CBD for medical purposes has been illegal worldwide for some time. The VAC and Dr. Baca wanted to remind you of all this. What the world chooses to do with it, we will now sit back and watch. What we've heard over the past hour reflects an important development in the evolution of cannabis policy and science. Long before governments began debating cannabinoids and regulatory frameworks, there were patients, caregivers, cultivators, working quietly to solve real problems. They were not focused on politics, they were focused on outcomes, of whether someone suffering from seizures, chronic pain, or neurological illnesses could finally find relief. It's one reason why I've spent the last 26 years selling medical cannabis over the counter in the United States. We cannot wait for governments and for regulators to catch up. We had to risk our freedoms and put our freedoms on the line and do so every day, because we are also patients and we're tired of waiting. So we have had to create all this from nothing. The development of CBD-rich cannabis varieties like Harlequin did not emerge from theory alone. It came from observation, compassion, and collaboration between patients and cultivators who were paying attention to what worked. Those early efforts helped reveal the therapeutic potential of cannabinoids that today are being studied, regulated, over-regulated, and discussed in policy forums around the world. We also hold today about the evolution of international frameworks. Interpretations of the conventions continue to develop as scientific understanding improves. The recognition that purified CBD does not require the same level of control as psychoactive substances reflects a broader principle that regulation should follow evidence and serve public health. But policy discussions can sometimes lose sight of the human stories that made this progress possible. That is why we frame today's discussion around the life and work of Wade Laughter. Wade was not working to influence international treaties or regulatory interpretations. He worked with plants and with people. He listened to patients. He paid attention to their experiences. And he believed that if something in this plant could help someone suffer less, It was worth the effort to find it and cultivate it. Many ideas we discussed today about CBD patient access and cannabinoid diversity were being explored years ago by people like Wade and the community around it. Our work helped open the door to the conversations now happening in rooms like this one. As we move forward in shaping policy, research, and regulation, it is worth remembering where where much of this knowledge began, not in institutions, but in communities committed to helping patients. Policies shape the future of medicine, but people like Wade Laughter are the reasons those policies matter. Wade never asked to be remembered as a pioneer. He simply wanted patients to have something that worked. I will close this out with a few words from our veteran brother and impart some of his wonderful words to you that inspired many of us along the way. So with that, breathe, my love.
And then I promise I'm going to stop. I've really been thinking about what is compassion. And I think compassion is it's a verb. It's an action word. One can feel empathy for another person's situation. And that's a beautiful thing. That's how we grow our hearts. That's how we grow our understanding of who we are and where we are in the world. But compassion comes into play when you do something about the suffering of another person. Yeah, compassion is a verb.
Thank you very much, everybody. This has been a great C&D. Thank you, Wade. We love you.
Thank you, everybody. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Y'all have a good one. Yeah, there is.
This is the same, you know, there must be some kind of proof.
I got that video. We're all flying out and everybody.
Yes, yeah, yes. So there's like this, ice cream. Yeah, so that was kind of this.
Hopefully not in any of our members too fast, but we're here on the other side. Absolutely, appreciate you. Yes, what I recruited Michael, Crowley, Michael. I don't want to turn it off. Well, they can close that because I'm uploading mine. Also, sounds like I got oh, listen, Joshua.
Oh, Caleb's still on? Yeah. Hi, Leslie. Oh, shit. You can hear we're just getting ready. Wait, I got to turn on the video. So you can wait. Not on? Yeah, now the video's on. Hi, Caleb. I'm going to shut down so I can transfer the video.
Oh, awesome.
Hey.
How did it go?
So, let me shut down and then you can start the window right back up, okay? Hey. We'll do it together. That way I make sure I don't kick you out.
All right.
So should I log out too?
Video goes just 50 minutes to the VAC thing, so it's it only says partially blocked because video contains copyrighted material. When it did the search, it says presentation.